Chapter 5: The Cleveland Massacres and Consolidation. With Standard Oil firmly established and its operations humming with unprecedented efficiency, John D. Rockefeller turned his gaze outward, surveying the fragmented landscape of the oil refining industry. His vision, as ever, was not merely to compete, but to consolidate. He saw the hundreds of small, inefficient refineries as a source of instability, driving down prices and leading to wasteful practices. For Rockefeller, this chaos was an affront to logic, an obstacle to progress. He believed, with an almost religious fervor, that order and stability could only be achieved through consolidation, and he was determined to be the orchestrator of that consolidation. The year 1872 marked the beginning of his most audacious and controversial move, the methodical acquisition of Cleveland's refineries, an event that would become infamously known as the Cleveland Massacre. Rockefeller's chosen instrument for this campaign was the secretive and highly contentious South Improvement Company. This clandestine arrangement, formed with the major railroads, the Erie, the Pennsylvania, and the New York Central, promised Standard Oil incredibly favorable, deeply discounted freight rates. But here was the crucial, damning detail: the railroads also agreed to pay Standard Oil rebates on every barrel of oil shipped by their competitors. In essence, Standard Oil profited from the very shipments of its rivals, while those rivals paid higher rates, making their operations unsustainable. The unveiling of the South Improvement Company sent shockwaves through the oil region. Independent refiners and producers were outraged, their cries echoing through the valleys of Pennsylvania. They understood immediately that this alliance between Standard Oil and the railroads spelled ruin for anyone outside the favored circle. Faced with insurmountable transportation costs, their options were stark. This was where Rockefeller's psychological warfare and financial leverage came into play. He approached his Cleveland competitors with an almost disarming calm, offering them a choice that was, in reality, no choice at all: cooperation or ruin. He presented them with the cold, hard facts of the South Improvement Company, demonstrating how their businesses, no matter how efficient, could not possibly compete against Standard Oil's railroad advantages. He offered fair prices for their refineries, often in Standard Oil stock, tying their future to his, or he warned, politely but firmly, that he would crush them. The pressure was immense. Banks, fearing the instability, often sided with Standard Oil, denying credit to struggling independents. Railroads, bound by their secret agreements, refused to transport their oil at competitive rates. One by one, or in clusters, Cleveland's independent refiners capitulated. In a mere 3 months, Rockefeller acquired 22 of Cleveland's 26 refineries. The Cleveland Massacre was swift, brutal, and breathtakingly effective. He had achieved a near monopoly in Cleveland, transforming a fragmented industry into a tightly controlled powerhouse. This period ignited a fierce and enduring moral and ethical debate that would dog Rockefeller for the rest of his life. Critics condemned his tactics as predatory, ruthless, and un-American. They saw him as a robber baron who choked out competition, destroyed independent livelihoods, and amassed wealth through ethically dubious means. Their outrage was palpable, and it laid the groundwork for the growing anti-monopoly sentiment across the nation. Yet, Rockefeller and his defenders saw it differently. From their perspective, the industry needed this consolidation. They argued that the previous chaos led to unreliable products, dangerous practices, and wild price swings that ultimately harmed consumers. They believed their methods brought efficiency, stability, and lower prices for kerosene to the American public. In their view, this was not ruthless capitalism for its own sake, but necessary consolidation for a nascent industry to mature and serve the public effectively. They were, in their own eyes, bringing order to the industrial wilderness, even if it meant stepping on a few toes along the way. The lines were drawn, and the Cleveland Massacre marked the definitive beginning of the public resentment that would eventually force Standard Oil into the national spotlight, setting the stage for even greater battles to come. Chapter 6: Pipelines, Trusts, and Power. Having consolidated the refining capacity of Cleveland with such swift, decisive, and controversial strokes, John D. Rockefeller understood a fundamental truth about the burgeoning oil industry: true power lay not just in refining, but in controlling transportation. His dependence on railroads, while initially advantageous due to secret rebates, was also a vulnerability. Railroads, for all their utility, were external entities, prone to their own rate fluctuations, strikes, and political pressures. Rockefeller envisioned a system where Standard Oil had an even tighter, more unassailable grip on the flow of oil. His solution was a monumental undertaking: the crucial investment in pipelines. While others focused on acquiring more refineries, Rockefeller poured resources into building vast networks of pipelines, snaking across the landscape from the oil fields of Pennsylvania directly to Standard Oil's refining centers and then onward to major distribution hubs. This was strategic genius. Pipelines offered a cheaper, more reliable, and critically, a more private method of transporting crude oil. They allowed Standard Oil to bypass the railroads, eliminating their leverage and further reducing costs. This shift was akin to an anaconda tightening its coils around its prey. By controlling the very arteries of the industry, Standard Oil was achieving an almost total dominance over the flow of oil. Small producers, unable to afford their own pipelines, were forced to use Standard Oil's lines, granting the giant further control over their output and, eventually, their very existence. As Standard Oil's reach expanded beyond Ohio, encompassing refineries and distribution networks across multiple states, a new challenge emerged: how to legally and efficiently manage such a sprawling, interstate enterprise. State laws often restricted corporations from owning property or operating directly in other states. The solution, ingenious in its legal structure and devastating in its effectiveness, was the formation of the Standard Oil Trust in 1882. This was a legal innovation that centralized control over Rockefeller's vast empire. Instead of directly owning all the individual Standard Oil companies in various states, stockholders of those companies transferred their shares to a board of 9 trustees, led by Rockefeller himself. In return, they received trust certificates, granting them a share of the trust's profits. This structure allowed Standard Oil to operate as a single, unified entity across state lines, circumventing legal restrictions and acting with singular purpose. It was a masterpiece of corporate organization, a powerful legal framework for what was essentially a national monopoly. The immense power wielded by the trust was staggering. By the mid-1880s, Standard Oil controlled an estimated 90% of America's refining capacity and a vast portion of its transportation and marketing infrastructure. This unprecedented dominance allowed the trust to dictate pricing for kerosene across the nation, often lowering it to drive out competition, then raising it once rivals were gone. It controlled production, influencing the very output of the oil fields. The livelihoods of thousands of independent oilmen, producers, and workers hinged on the decisions made by the 9 trustees in Cleveland. Standard Oil became the unseen hand that lit the lamps in every American home, and its shadow stretched across the economic landscape. Inevitably, such unchecked power ignited a fervent rise of anti-monopoly sentiment. Small businesses cried foul, farmers resented the power of big corporations, and the general public grew increasingly uneasy with the immense, seemingly unchallengeable influence of trusts. Whispers turned into shouts, local protests into national movements. It was in this atmosphere that the muckraker journalists began to sharpen their pens. These investigative reporters sought to expose the dark underbelly of industrial power, shining a light on the practices of trusts and their leaders. Among them, a woman named Ida Tarbell began her painstaking research into Standard Oil, driven by a deeply personal history. Her father had been an independent oil producer driven out by Rockefeller's tactics. Her early investigative work, long before her famous 1904 exposé, was already gathering the damning evidence, meticulously cataloging the ruthless strategies and controversial maneuvers that allowed Rockefeller to build his empire. The battle lines were being drawn, not just in boardrooms and oil fields, but in the court of public opinion. The era of the all-powerful trust was at its zenith, but the forces that would eventually seek to dismantle it were gathering momentum, fueled by a growing demand for fairness and accountability. Part 3: The Public Scrutiny and the Private Conscience, 1890–1911. Chapter 7, The Gilded Cage, Wealth and Scrutiny. By the dawn of the 1890s, John D. Rockefeller had achieved what few could even dream of. He was, without question, the richest man in the world, his fortune dwarfing that of kings and emperors. Standard Oil, the colossus he had meticulously built, controlled an astonishing percentage of the global oil market, its tendrils reaching into every corner of American life. The vastness of his wealth was almost unfathomable, measured in hundreds of millions, soon to be billions, at a time when a workingman's daily wage was a mere $1. Yet, this unimaginable opulence was held in stark contrast to Rockefeller's own relatively private, almost austere personal life. Unlike many of his Gilded Age contemporaries who reveled in ostentatious displays of wealth, building grand mansions, hosting lavish parties, and collecting European art, Rockefeller remained remarkably reserved. His homes were comfortable, but not excessively so. He was a devout Baptist, a teetotaler who avoided tobacco, and a man who prized quiet evenings with his family over social extravaganzas. He wore plain suits, played golf with a modest demeanor, and practiced tithing his income to his church with unwavering consistency. This disconnect between the public perception of the robber baron and the private man fueled fascination, and at times, suspicion. For the public, the sheer scale of his fortune and the pervasive reach of Standard Oil became a source of growing alarm. This was the era of the growing public outcry against trusts and monopolies. Farmers, feeling squeezed by railroad rates and market manipulations, joined with small businessmen, who watched their independent enterprises swallowed by giants. Populist movements gained traction, their platforms fueled by resentment against corporate power. Newspapers, eager for a story, churned out vivid political cartoons depicting Rockefeller as an octopus with tentacles strangling the nation, or a greedy king hoarding all the wealth. The perception of Standard Oil as an oppressive force, crushing competition and dictating terms, became deeply ingrained in the national consciousness. This widespread public discontent did not go unheard in the halls of power. In 1890, in a direct response to the unchecked power of corporate trusts like Standard Oil, Congress passed the Sherman Antitrust Act. This landmark legislation made it illegal to form trusts or conspiracies that restrain trade, marking the federal government's first significant attempt to regulate monopolies. It was a clear signal that the era of unfettered industrial consolidation might be drawing to a close, at least in theory. Through it all, Rockefeller maintained a remarkable, almost unsettling, stoic response to public criticism. He rarely engaged in public debates or issued fiery rebuttals. When he did speak, it was often with a quiet conviction, unwavering in his belief that his methods were ultimately beneficial for the economy and the consumer. He genuinely believed that the efficiency and stability brought by Standard Oil had lowered the price of kerosene for ordinary Americans, making light accessible and affordable. He saw the chaos of the independent market as inefficient and wasteful, and his consolidation as a necessary step towards progress. For Rockefeller, the criticism was merely the noise of those who didn't understand the grand design, the necessary pain of progress. Yet, beneath the surface of his calm exterior, the incessant public attacks undoubtedly took their toll, slowly, imperceptibly, nudging the private conscience of the world's richest man towards a new, even more ambitious, purpose. The gilded cage of his immense wealth was becoming a very public, very uncomfortable, prison. Chapter 8, A Shift in Focus, From Accumulation to Distribution. As the century turned, ushering in the turbulent dawn of the 20th century, a profound, yet remarkably quiet, transformation began to take place in the life of John D. Rockefeller. Despite the ongoing legal battles and the public outcry against his empire, Rockefeller himself was undergoing a subtle but significant transition. By the late 1890s, he began a gradual, almost imperceptible retirement from the day-to-day operations of Standard Oil. He didn't issue grand pronouncements or make a dramatic exit. Instead, he simply began to delegate more, to spend less time in the bustling corporate offices, and more time cultivating his beloved golf courses and reflecting in the quietude of his estates. The mantle of leadership was slowly, seamlessly passed to a new generation of executives, confident in the robust structure he had so meticulously built. This retreat from the relentless pursuit of profit was not a sudden impulse, but the culmination of deeply ingrained principles. From his earliest days, shaped by his steadfast mother, Eliza, Rockefeller had been a devout Baptist. He practiced tithing, donating 10% of his income to his church and various charities, from his very first paycheck as a bookkeeper. His early, personal acts of charity were numerous, if often unsung. He funded local churches, supported temperance movements, and quietly aided individuals in need. For Rockefeller, wealth was not merely a personal possession, it was a sacred trust, a gift from God that carried with it a profound moral obligation to be managed wisely and for the betterment of others. The true catalyst for his systematic shift from accumulation to distribution, however, arrived in the form of a remarkable individual, Frederick Taylor Gates. Gates, a former Baptist minister with a powerful intellect and an unshakable belief in the potential of large-scale benevolence, first encountered Rockefeller while raising funds for the fledgling University of Chicago. Their meeting was serendipitous, forging a pivotal relationship that would redefine modern philanthropy. Gates, observing Rockefeller's vast wealth and his earnest, if somewhat unorganized, charitable impulses, became his trusted philanthropic advisor. It was Gates who articulated a revolutionary concept, scientific giving. He urged Rockefeller to abandon scattered, ad hoc donations in favor of a strategic, systematic approach. Gates believed that giving away money effectively required the same rigorous research, careful planning, and meticulous organization that Rockefeller had applied to building Standard Oil. "Your fortune is rolling up like an avalanche," Gates famously told him. "You must distribute it faster than it accumulates. If you do not, it will crush you and your children and your children's children." This was the profound realization that truly set Rockefeller apart from many of his wealthy contemporaries. He understood, with crystal clarity, that distributing wealth effectively required the same rigorous organization and strategic thinking as accumulating it. It was not enough to simply hand out money, it had to be invested, managed, and directed with purpose to achieve lasting impact. This meant establishing permanent institutions, staffed by experts, that could address societal problems with the same efficiency and scale that Standard Oil had brought to the oil industry. The principles that built the empire would now be turned to the task of building a better world, transforming the robber baron into the architect of an enduring philanthropic legacy. The era of the unseen hand was about to take on a completely different meaning.
I hope you enjoyed this video. If you do, please don't forget to like, comment and share this video. Also don't forget to subscribe the channel and press the bell icon, so that you don't miss out the next video. For now, you can continue with the next video or can go through the complete playlist provided here.